Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Bjorn Soren Gigler. He is a senior digital and green transformation specialist at DG Clima of the European Commission. He is coordinating AI for Cities Climate Action Initiative. Before that, he was head of data economy and digital twin transition program. He's had a very varied career from being at European Commission. He was at the World Bank, and he has a PhD in international development from LSE and masters in economics from Munich, and also a master's from George Washington University. He's the author of Development as Freedom in the Digital Age, a World Bank publication, and he has several other publications to his credit. With that, Soren, please, we can start the lecture.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And so I will focus today on the topic of development as freedom or unfreedom, actually, in the AI age. So is AI and digital innovations AI enabling empowerment or disempowerment? Before I start my talk, I wanted to say this is really my personal research, yeah, also associated with Georgetown University, and this does not really, this is my research and it's not the European Commission's official take on these topics. That's just an important footnote. So now, starting out the topic, AI is certainly a technology that is transformational, that is changing our economies and societies, and it's amplifying human behavior. So I've been working actually for the last 20 years on the question, what is the impact of digital technologies on human development? And particularly, how can we measure the impact of digital on the well-being, economic, but also the social and human well-being of poor communities? And thereby, I basically have developed, and I can now go here to my slide. So you see, first publication is Development as Freedom in a Digital Age. So there you find a theoretical framework that basically links directly human development outcomes to digital technologies. And it has two sections, the book. It basically has the theoretical part where I've developed, based on Amartya Sen's capability approach, this framework to assess the impact of digital technologies and applied for the first time the capability approach to the measurement or on digital technologies. And now I'm working a lot on AI. The second part of the book is empirical. So then I have applied basically this framework, which also has very concrete KPIs, concrete indicators, to several case studies in Bolivia, in rural communities, where I have conducted a lot of primary research, survey work, both quantitative and qualitative work, which was basically applying that framework. And now I wanted to lead you through the main research questions. So what is the research focus? Here's an outline of my presentation. What are some of the key findings? And the theoretical framework, the hypothesis. So first questions are, under which conditions can we use still ICTs, but we can then also discuss, of course, AI. To what extent can digital technologies enhance the well-being of local and indigenous communities? Which factors influence whether local communities enhance their human capabilities to the use of technologies and improve their well-being? And what is the role of intermediary organizations such as grassroots organizations, NGOs, and governments, local governments particularly, to introduce ICTs to local and indigenous communities? So maybe before I go into more detail, because my recent work is more also focused on applying this concept to AI. So what is different about AI than other digital technologies? Well, the first thing, as you know, is the adoption rate. So the diffusion of AI has been incredible. Like now we have I think more than a billion users per week of the major AI tools. And that's the fastest rapid diffusion and adoption of technology so far. And AI adds basically a whole new dimension to this work. And I'm very concerned about what I call the AI poverty. So I've recently written an article called Confronting AI Poverty in the Digital Age, which is very much based on this earlier work, but which looks into specific factors that basically determine to what extent AI can actually lead to the further increase of economic disparities and social exclusion. And that's a topic I'm very concerned about. But I thought it's really important to first share with you the theoretical framework about the capability approach and digital technologies, and then how we apply it to AI. So here, the research focus is basic alternative evaluation framework on ICTs, unpack the link between digital and economic and social development, and important to go beyond the sheer access and usage. Because one fact, for instance, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, more than 50% of people who have access to the internet are not using it. So because of affordability issues, because of lack of content, lack of skills and capabilities. So my entry point is in fact a criticism of the digital divide literature, because I strongly believe that we have to go far beyond digital access and look at other factors which determine whether or not digital technologies, including AI, basically enhance people's well-being and human and economic development. So that's basically here, information. Then I developed this concept of information and informational capabilities as a human capability, so that to evaluate to what extent digital technologies in fact have a positive impact on people's economic and social well-being, a critical aspect is in fact their capabilities, and not the ICT skills so much, but their informational capabilities. And I've defined this in the publications in the book, where basically informational capabilities is the ability to access, evaluate, and act upon information and data I obtain through digital technologies and AI. Now, just a side note on this. With the rapid growth of AI, there is basically AI automation or AI augmentation. What do I mean by that? That either people use AI tools just to get results without really interacting with it a lot. Automation, everything is being optimized. Or augmentation, when then people have skills and a lot of human capabilities to interact in an iterative process with AI tools, where the human is people are defining exactly the product the AI is producing, But my main point here being it requires a lot of capabilities. So we need more and more human capabilities to shape, to enact, and to also control AI. And that is the main point. So the second, there's a causal link. So is there a causal link between, I'm an economist, so I always was very concerned about, could we find some causal link between ICT, digital, and poverty and human development? And that's part, that's why I developed this ICT impact chain. And the last part, important, I looked very closely into the intermediary process, such as, so not what is being done, but the process and how digital technologies are being introduced to local communities. What is the ownership? What is the participation of these processes? And who is supporting the poor and poor communities in the adoption? And I went further, even call it local appropriation and ownership of technologies, and how is that process being steered? So now analysis here of some of the human development. In this case, you can see Bolivia. So you see human development. And one thing is important in many other countries as well. Here, the red areas, you see basically the low human development index in comparison to other areas. So that differences within the country and many other countries are extreme. And you see that basically that was a topic that was very interesting. Also, the changes of the development over the years. So you see here areas in green where basically they have improved their human development, and areas in red, which are orange, they have even stagnated. And there are huge differences within. So geography matters. So here, this I think already I have spoken about, the theoretical framework. And then one thing important is, so I worked a lot on the concept of empowerment. So what does it actually mean, and how do we define it in a theoretical framework? So for instance, Paulo Freire's was very influenced by Paulo Freire's theories of conscientization, that empowerment takes a process of the poor and the marginalized to reflect, to self-reflect, and the educational process where they analyze, where poor people analyze their institutional structures, the social structures, and incorporate that into the capability approach. Oh, I'm sorry, CA is capability approach. And what is new? Now you'll say, what is different about my research to other, maybe? What could be one or two value added? So I would maybe then refer to this concept of informational capabilities, which did not exist before. So here, how do I define information capabilities? So first are ICT skills, so ICT capabilities, more how to use tools, how to use an AI tool. But then it comes very soon and differentiate about the information literacy, and here how to find, process, evaluate, and use information and data. And in also my empirical work, I've seen that here a lot, for instance, I worked a lot with rural farmers and farmer communities about prices, information of prices. So what, internet empowers local farmers because now they have access to information on prices on a daily basis or maybe hourly basis. But the key topic people have not yet not talked so much about it, that farmers need the capacity to process this information and to analyze prices. And that, at least in my research, I found that many farmers and many communities did not have that information. So in spite of having access to the internet, in spite of having access to tools, also chatbots, in this case, AI tools, we recent work, a lot of work of chatbots being developed through program, for instance, Fair Forward. It's a German supported program which supports chatbots in local languages even. providing extension services to local farmers. But a key challenge still remains people's information literacy and their capabilities to not just obtain, receive the information, but then to evaluate it, put it into their local knowledge, their indigenous or like local base, traditional knowledge, and then most important to act upon it. The third is the communication capabilities. There I was very optimistic or very positive, because one thing at least my research found, that people use digital technologies a lot to enhance their communications with also institutions, friends, family, but also professional, particularly strengthen institution. I looked at institutional factors. So how can digital enhance, for instance, farmers' organizations? And here the finding was that it's quite positive. Next is about content to produce and share. So not just to passively consume content. I think this is now a real danger with the AI because there is a data gap. So very important data gap. So many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, work a lot in Senegal, or even countries like Malawi, you don't have easy access to data and information or content, local content. AI is based on data and local content. So if now people and policymakers want to use AI for policy making, say in Malawi on agriculture, a key challenge is that the current AI tools do not have sufficient local content and data to provide meaningful orientation and advice. But a lot of the experience is design reality gap is basically a lot of the content provided to policymakers right now is still based from the North, particularly North America or Europe, or maybe from middle income countries. There I want to make a very important differentiation at the moment. So for instance, Brazil or India, the middle income countries are very quite advanced in the adoption of AI, but not the LICs, like the low income countries have extreme poverty rates or weak institutions, and therefore my main point here being absence of data, no content, not sufficient content. Here you see this whole concept again visualized through this graphic, and it happens within a communications information ecology. So the context in which the local socioeconomic, political, but economic context matters tremendously on to what extent people can have informational capabilities or not. So the hypothesis that the access and use of digital have facilitated effective and local intermediary organizations to enhance people's well-being. The second, ICT and digital can be locally appropriated and owned by communities to enhance the people's well-being. So on the first one, how does this process work? Yeah, I really looked into the process itself. I unpacked the process, and there's a proximity of local. So what are key factors which enable local communities to really appropriate and shape technologies based on their local needs? So the first is that what I found that it's really important to first really understand local communities' information needs, data needs. So AI cannot be, digital is not the solution, it's not a panacea. So it's first really important to analyze what information exists, where are the gaps, what are actually communication channels the communities are using, and what are the priorities? What is in fact the problem? Developmental problem, if I may say so, or development challenges that we want to enhance. So is it enhancing the access to basic services such as education, health, or water? Is it more a question of other knowledge, enhanced economic opportunities? And now, at least I have the feeling it's AI for good, yeah, AI for all, without first really defining the local needs and the steps how we have to shape and enact technology and AI to meet local, economic, political, and cultural needs and within the context. And that's why it's very hard, I think, to provide a general statements. It has to be context specific. Another work here at the beginning, I said already about the amplifying tool of technology. So technologies, and particularly AI, amplifies human behavior for the good and also for the bad. So here, I think a process of some level of intermediation would be useful. I know it's there's a tension here between the notion that people directly get empowered through the technology and the need, do they really need anybody to use AI or digital tools? I know many years ago there was the hole in the wall experiment in a slum of Delhi, where basically technology was just kids had access to the internet and text without any guidance, and the experiment showed that very deprived children on the street were able to 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 use the technology and digital. But what does that mean? You know, they just use it, but they didn't improve their lives. They did not improve their livelihoods. So next is here this local appropriation process, and here comes a very important topic about sustainability. So financial, of course, but also socially sustainable programs. Because throughout my career, to be honest, I've seen a lot of digital programs that might work well for 3-4 years, but they do not continue in the longer term. They're unfortunately many times not sustained because there's also often a lack of business plans and how these digital solutions fit the local markets in the social context. So, and here I strongly, my research has shown, yeah, that an iterative process of technology and adoption is basically determined to what extent there is the individual empowerment and individuals can shape technology, or to what extent the overall system is shaping the individual. And the structuration theory, I think, which shows this dialectic between one, the structures in place, social structures, economic structures, and the individual's agency. Yeah, I think the capability approach of Amartya Sen is very much based on human agency and the ability of humans, as deprived they might be, to strengthen their agency and to enhance their well-being in spite of these structural impediments. And here technology can play an important role, and that's the focus here. So methodology, as I said, the quantitative methods, the surveys, I used qualitative methods as well, like in-depth interviews, and then triangulated those results with each other. And of course, there were a lot of contradictions. And the first thing, by the way, I did find out many often that I had a very large amount of what I call non-users. So this might be surprising, but if you really go to rural areas in the Andes, local indigenous communities in Bolivia, Peru, you find still today a lot of people who still do not use extensively the internet. They might have a cell phone, but then they have not access to the cell phone where they live, but most importantly, even if they have access, it's very expensive. There's still this divide, this affordability divide, and globally, I think the latest ITU statistics is something like 2.5 billion people still do not have access to internet connectivity. So first, and still today, if we talk, for instance, about AI, yeah, who is using AI is still very much urban biased, male biased, and very strong bias towards income and education. So if you go into rural villages in the Andes, you'll find minimum, the LICs I just read have an adoption rate of AI of 1%, 2%, while middle income countries, as I said, have it of 18% or so, or up to 25%. So it's very, very different. So the differences are even amplified. So basically, I tried to establish a causal relationship, and I have to admit I failed. But that was actually a main finding from my research, that the relationship between digital and poverty is very indirect. There is no direct linear causal relationship between the two. It's very dependent on different steps, processes, influences, but however, there are important factors that determine whether or not digital makes a real impact on human development. And one of the key basic factors is, in my opinion, or in this research, is capabilities. So it's a lot about people's capabilities and how that translates. So here, maybe this goes not too specific. I know in the time I might like to skip this, is the information needs. So now I come more towards the empirical findings already. So there's a lot of horizontal sharing, like poor communities very much value a lot of information they obtained from other communities. So also south-south learning is very very valued. And I was really almost surprised how little people in communities were valuing even information from government, central government. Some in one interview, some community members said to me, "Oh, for me, government is like God. We know it exists, but we barely see it and we cannot touch it, and we do not get a lot of benefits from it." So in terms of information in the service, I specifically asked what type of information and data you would like to have better access to, and government information rated relatively low, actually extremely low, while, for instance, local farmers' practices how to deal with climate resilient crops so was much higher rated than basically other information. Here you see some of the exact data points on this horizontal information exchange. So very high rates of horizontal exchanges of information between communities facilitated by technology, and also, also institutional, like organizational information. Yeah, that they found really interesting. So here the need of going beyond the internet. So this is also what I said before, that only 36, 1/3 of people had no access to digital, but the real impediments, yeah, were even here. Look at this: 21% of survey results said that they didn't know how to use it, how it works, and it was too expensive. But the biggest empirical finding was that people considered this number like lack of capacity. And my hypothesis now from my new research on human capabilities and AI is that due to the AI revolution, we'll have another AI divide, which I believe it will be much more significant even than the digital divide. And the AI literacy is a critical factor enabling poor and marginalized communities to use AI. And it's really not, as you all know, when we ourselves use AI, it takes a lot. Even I find personally much more skills required to assess the validity of the results, to cross-check it. If you just use it with that, I think there's a real threat that people use it not very critically. They just take the results for given, and then they don't derive as many benefits out of it, out of its use, or even could also become disinformation. Yeah, victims of disinformation. Now here, this is the primary data. By the way, one of the key findings, I know the time, but I was very surprised that at least in my findings, the age and the gender were not decisive factors. So what do I mean by that? That it was much more important where the person, where she or he is living, in which municipality, in which where that survey was undertaken, what were the overall basic needs or human development index in this town, or in this municipality. This were much more in my logistical regression analysis. So the work also has a very model like quantifying the impact. These socioeconomic factors were much more decisive than even age, gender, and education, which went very much against many of the findings of the digital divide, also from other non-developing countries, because there, I think the education level is significantly higher. But I honestly was perplexed by this finding that that even people with I had a sample of people with bachelor degrees who came from very poor backgrounds, still had much lower capabilities than people who were not from this background. High correlation between, in this case, geographic location, also the ethnicity played a significant role, great diversity within different groups, and socioeconomic factors, and not individuals, were the explaining factor for digital inequalities, at least based on my research. Internet use and capabilities are independent of age and gender in this context. Maybe I should really put the context. Yeah, it's very context specific. And intermediary, that played a very strong determining role. So what were organizational and structures that supported the people in the appropriation context? Just the maintenance, for instance, of technologies. Also, for instance, VSATs. There's a lot of first that type of connectivity that were many times not maintained. So donors would come and provide connectivity services who did not work after 2 or 3 years. So it was really important how this also the infrastructure was maintained, and the skills, again, skills of people not just to passively use and consume digital and other technologies, however, to really manage them, shape them, and be able to control them. So here huge differences. Again, here you see the concrete data on the intermediate factor. So these abbreviations. So these were the different type of organizations I evaluated. And this were basically, in la red here is a government, local e-government program funded by USAID at the time, and which, by the way, had very relatively poor results. As you see here, only basic, advanced skills. So the skills enhancement through the program was quite limited. And on the other hand, here you see some programs like OMAC is a grassroots organization, a women's group who incorporated digital into its economic livelihoods programs. And this is second, here's a program for local farmers run by a local NGO. Like here you see that the 44% stated that their capabilities improved through the through this program. So yeah, so maybe here to conclude, which dimensions? So I looked, as I said, aiming for a holistic approach: economic, political, social, and cultures. So which dimensions do the communities perceive to be the most relevant, where digital and technologies can make the biggest difference? And to what extent do these enhance their human and social capabilities? And here you see, maybe one moment, please, still on the economic dimension, that was, by the way, the most polarized results. So people were, like the empirical findings showed that 52% said yes, but then at the same time, maybe if you go here to the actual data, you see that 52% believed and indicated that internet services and digital would improve the economic opportunities. However, 24% said no, yeah, that they believed that would not make any difference. So as I tried to say, this was confirmed through the qualitative research, where I interviewed a lot of rural farmers. And the price, it was this one project I showed you before from Gigler, was NGO providing price informations to farmers, and that they said, yes, now I have access to this information, but I still have the problem of transport. I still cannot produce big quantities. So I do now know the price of, for instance, grain or potatoes in the city, in the intermediate cities. However, I cannot sell my products for this price, and it does not enhance directly my economic well-being. On the other hand, the action where it was really confirmed was on the social dimension. And here, like the strengthening of institutions, social grassroots organizations, and this factor that I would like now in my looking more into this question of how AI empowers people personally. So this notion of that you could use AI and chatbots for educational trainers, yeah, so directly learn from the AI without actually the formal education system. Here already it showed that the very remote and poor communities were arguing that they felt empowered, that they said that, yes, now I belong to modernity. I feel now I'm part of the modern life because I have access and I know how to use those digital tools. And that perception that more Amartya Sen also talks about these topics of more psychological empowerment and agency are actually really important, because they how people perceive themselves and their surroundings, that I found was the one of the most direct positive impact of digital technologies on the poor. Another dimension, and then I really want to conclude on this, is the organizational. So I could see clearly that local organizations were much better to coordinate their actions, to communicate with other, also at the regional, local, regional, national levels. So Farmers Association, there the access to digital and skill really enhanced their significantly their well-being, or they had a positive impact. So now let me maybe come to the yeah, I think I'll not go right into the detailed case studies, but I wanted to give you more an update on my recent work on the AI. And here, basically, on my recent paper, Confronting of AI Poverty, I look into actually different factors. So the first factor, which I strongly find, is that there should be a AI policy framework at the national level, which defines under which what are the data. For instance, we worked a lot on data frameworks, a governance framework for the use of AI, and to define where it should be used and where not, and under what, give some goalposts for the use of AI. And what is currently not done so much, I believe, what I call pro-poor AI policies. That when we design national AI strategies and national AI policies, they are many times focused a lot on enhancing economic productivity, provide more economic opportunities, and are not focused so much targeted towards also poor and how can they poor. The second is, I mentioned before, local relevant content and data. AI is all about data, but local data, hyper local data. So for instance, in the US, a very common application was always, where do I send my children to school? If I want to know the quality of education, what matters is the zip code. In which zip code do I live and what is the best school within the zip code? It does not help me a lot to have information or data on the national performance PISA index from OECD, on the national performance of my country in terms of education. What I really want to know is what is the best school where I live. And in the current context, if you now go to, say, Bolivia, Peru, or any country in Africa as well, or in Asia, and you want to have this local really data and information, it's not there. I think there are big data gaps, and as long as there are big data gaps, the real value of AI will be limited. The next is the capabilities. So really strengthening people's AI capabilities. And here also, I would really emphasize again, as I've done throughout my talk, what do we do? What do people do with the information, the data, and almost the overflow of information you obtain through AI? And how do you act upon it? What concrete actions, like how can a local entrepreneur really design his or her business based on information or data he or she obtains from AI? Then the third aspect is community-led adoption. So basically, the adoption of AI tools. I only mentioned, for instance, these work with local languages to make them like this program I mentioned, Fair Forward, works in Swahili, in local languages, trying to, with the government, also to provide e-extension services to local farmers, but in their own languages. So, but then there's still a process needed to appropriate that technology and appropriate that knowledge, and then, for instance, to plant seeds or plants that are particularly climate resilient, that have better chances to cope with climate change. And that's the critical question, I think. Does it really lead to changes in human behavior? Does it really empower farmers to basically have different crops, have a different, maybe strategy might be a big word, but a different way of securing their livelihoods? that I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and that has, according to my finding, not to do with the technology itself, but with many other institutional, social, cultural, and political factors. Well, thank you so much. I'll give back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soren. This very informative lecture on the diffusion of technology and adoption, and adoption and really enhancing human capabilities. With that, I'll open for questioning. Please, Sudhir, Sham, or anybody else who wants to speak, please do.
I have one question, if I may. Thank you first for your talk and sharing your field research work, which is, I know, very difficult to do and hard work. Takes a lot of time and effort. As I understood it, in the talk, I got the impression that the cell phone communications technology, computers, and artificial intelligence were being bundled all together under one label.
Yes.
Is that a fair interpretation of what I heard? And if so, is that a reasonable thing to do for the purpose of your research work?
Thank you. Maybe we take another question, or
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead and answer, and we'll go in order. Yeah. Sudhir, if you
it's
want to go ahead.
a related question I have is the findings which are coming from ICT, can we extrapolate to AI? Do the same assumptions hold when you push it towards AI? That was the thing in my mind.
thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you for these questions. So I think that is was not appropriately addressed in my presentation. Yeah, I take this on. So of course there's very large differences between the types of technology, whether it's cell phone, computer, or AI. Yeah, the different type of. But you see, my research, as Sub has highlighted, is more about the actual adoption of technology. It's really focused on the demand side. Not, I'm not a computer scientist, yeah. So I do not look specifically into the technology itself, but I was really very much interested in the processes and the impact of digital technologies on the poor and how that works. So now, but in the book, you will see, or in the publication, you can see a clear differentiation, because I was clearly differentiating between like internet, cell phones, and I also look, by the way, at community radio, like traditional ICTs, digital technologies, and the combination of those. So basically, and a key finding was that traditional ways of communication were more effective in reaching poor communities. And the most effective was the combination of all technologies together. So for instance, very concretely, in this one case study, which was providing rural farmers with market information, what the program did, they published the results. They went manually to the markets every morning at 6 a.m., collected that information manually, posted this on a website on the internet, and provided that then to the local radio stations. And the farmers ultimately obtained the information not directly through the internet, but through the community radio station, which was reading out in local languages the price information, which was much more effective than the notion we have that everybody will use a cell phone directly to get the information. Now, the AI part is here underdeveloped, and I agree that AI is fundamentally, sorry, I'm not conclusive on that, whether it's fundamentally different or not. I think it's digital technologies which further amplifies its impact. Like, almost, if I may say so in a little informal way, ICTs on steroids, almost. Like, you see what I'm trying to say? Like, it takes the impact of digital technologies even further to the extreme. So if you now think about disinformation or any way of also excellent results of AI, but at the moment I feel that there is a lot of hype about AI and very little empirical evidence about the real impact of AI on poor communities.
So if I were to extend the same example on weather information for farmers, right? In India also they've implemented such things. So one is when farmers have this information, they may make decisions on what kind of crop they should go for and so on. And based on their local information, they may plant certain crops and so on. Now today, if you move towards an AI type of environment and the same farmer is asking a question, given this weather pattern, you tell me what is the likely demand and what type of crop I should lay. The AI could answer this question based on some available information, which may or may not be local accurate, but it may end up saying for this season, for this area, you should plant this crop, right? And then people could end up with a glut of tomatoes and so on, which might emerge from such decisions. So this is where the challenge comes in. Like in the earlier case, I'm only giving information, but decision making is largely left to the farmer. In an AI scenario, the decision itself is being influenced, right? And which could go anyway, and who takes responsibility for that decision? Those are the kinds of questions which will start emerging.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I fully agree. I think the AI we've also seen it in disaster risk preparedness, for instance, floods or emergency droughts prediction. So we talk to climate scientists now, which tell us the climate modeling without AI is not even possible anymore. So AI is a very powerful tool, yeah, as you said, also for weather forecasting. The only issue which I see, or what I've seen in practice as well, there's still a very large step that then the farmers taking the right action, even if they have all of that information disposable. And there, my hypothesis was always that they need, and maybe intermediary is not the right term, but they need support structures in place of organizations who support them in that process. It's not automatic and direct that this adoption and particularly the change of human behavior or impact on economic and social behavior takes place.
Could I follow up on this a little bit, Sab?
Sure, please.
About maybe 25 years ago, so after Dr. Swaminathan in India retired from Indian Institute of Agricultural Research, he set up an institute in Chennai. And one of the things it was doing was to enable farmers to use information technology, the phone technology and so on, and computers for their work, crops, selling, finding out market information, and so on. From what I remember from my conversation with him, my visit there, he had to make a lot of effort to get this information from technology, new technologies, believable and useful to the farmers. Because and he pointed out that just because we make the information available doesn't mean information is good, that information they will believe, and it will give them the results they want. So it has to be shown, illustrated through examples and experience. So it takes quite a while for farmers to come to believe that I can trust this, because crop choice and those things are life and death decisions for them. That's what I remember from that experiment and the work he was doing at the time. But that was in late 90s or early 2000s.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing this. I was also in India at the time at the Baramati conference next to Pune. It was the IT for the poor. And yeah, I fully coincide with, like, the trust issue is essential. So it's a trust topic. Just one thing I've seen in practice, that many poor communities and also farmers have the highest expectations. They have even higher expectations than less middle class, for instance. They really thought that through technology, through the access of digital, they could escape poverty. And also in my interviews, by the way, a lot of rural women were saying, this is the future for our children, and it's absolutely essential. And throughout the years, I've seen that, unfortunately, the key challenge, at least my research, was realizing the benefits of it is much more difficult than talking about the potential. And today we all talk, or many talk, about the potential of AI, yeah, basically be a game changer, and for instance, on targeting the poor. But it's a potential. And they actually realized, yeah, I know there was this very famous article about the fishermen in India where it was quantified, yeah, that they were not going fishing because of the weather prediction. I think you referred to it earlier. But there are too few empirical cases which actually really demonstrate the positive and direct impact on people's livelihoods and move from potential to realized benefits.
So we should close soon. So I will ask you a question. It's not just the poor. I find that the expectation of AI, even in a country like US, is, I think a lot of it is misplaced. It's the notion of trust, the notion of validity of the information. We don't know how to measure how good is the information. I mean, there are efforts taking place, but what is the benchmark? We don't even have a benchmark to start with. And this creates a whole lot of potential spread of misinformation or wrong information to even the educated. I see some of my own colleagues using these and then starting to realize that, oh, I can use cloud to code my software, but I have to know how to fix it, how to make it better. Okay.
Yes.
What is wrong with it? So in effect, the amount of time spent in actually fixing it is longer than the amount of time you spend in getting the code generated by these. So you have multiple problems in terms of both measurement and validity, which have not been solved even in developed countries. And I fear that this could propagate even worse information in poorer communities, both of expectation and loss of trust over time.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, I think this is, I see there a huge research agenda in developing such a measurement framework. See, I don't, maybe I'm not aware of it, but I don't know any systematic theoretical framework that tries to assess the impact of AI, even on, say, one sector. It does, what I've seen doesn't exist. And one last comment I really wanted to share with you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy this. The one thing I was always disappointed over the last 20 years, there is still very relatively little empirical data on the exact impact of digital on communities. There is not a lot being published. There are, as you know, a lot of policy documents, a lot of frameworks, yeah, from all the institutions, from World Bank, ITU, OECD, and so forth. Now also on the AI, you find a lot of these, you know, policy papers, but then there's actually relative few people or research done which say, okay, in the context of, say, southern Bolivia, in this specific context, what is the real impact and what are the data showing us? What's the empirical evidence? I still, maybe I don't know. There are many more studies than I'm aware of, but I don't familiar with so many empirical studies.
As you might know, Kentaro Toyama from Microsoft wrote this book called Geek's Heresy. And I think technologists have this utopian vision of these technologies, while the social factors and social conditions are more important. And I was sort of amused that he had to discover it by living in India, but we know even from previous technologies, this is not straightforward. So I think technologists keep making the same mistake of not understanding how it is going to really impact locally, and also what are the requirements in a local sense. And I think this is a big problem in the way technology is being developed and propagated.
And what is the trust? I think the trust, yeah, very much. Because one of the topics I also really saw in the research is that technology comes with values, and they're embedded, and they're basically not reflecting always the values of people from the global south. And then AI currently context is predominantly, I know there are a lot of other companies as well, but the large AI companies are still in the US, North America, and China, and they do not always reflect the priorities of people in the South, global South.
Sudhir, anything else, or should we?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Soren. I think maybe you can wind up, sir.
Thank you very much for this interesting study. And sometimes I think we keep rediscovering the same thing. And however, that is important to rediscover, to reinforce the relationship between technology and human capabilities. So thank you very much for this talk. And
when is the next talk?
When is the next talk? I forget.
I think it will be in September.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll need to
might
finalize.
have something in between. We'll try. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
I hope this was
Professor Gigler.
great. All right.
Thank
All
you.
the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.